Welcome back to the Daily Horrorcast. Today, we're reading CreepyPastas, and we're going to start off with one I've never heard of before, but I can tell it's going to be good, and it's called Licking.
Wait, you've never heard of this one?
No.
Really?
Alright, well, so Kian's heard this story, me and Kyle haven't, so
Yeah.
it's going to be a fun one.
You guys are going in blind, and I'm leading you.
We're just gonna read it. We'll give all of our. It's a short one. We're gonna read it.
Just
we'll give all of
start
our
reading,
opinions
Doc.
after. Yeah, we'll give all
Just
of our
start
opinions.
reading.
Let's not cut in at all. Let's just blow through the story, and then we'll talk
Yeah,
after.
then we'll talk about it later. Yeah,
Okay.
go for it.
My great-grandmother lived alone up in the mountains at her cabin. Her husband was dead, so she was there all alone. She only had one companion, and that was her loving dog. They both adored each other, and the dog was a great comfort to her. Every night, when she went to bed, the dog would lick her hand to let her know that he was there to protect her. I do know this story. One night, she had gone to bed, and the dog had licked her hand, like he had done routinely every night since her husband died. But this night was different. She had woken up in the middle of the night because she heard her dog whimpering. She wanted to comfort him and let her know she was there for him. So she stuck her hand out by the bed, and she felt the dog gently lick her hand, like always. She figured he was just cold, so she went back to sleep.
The dog's whimpering had woken her up a second time in the night, so she stuck her hand out. The dog licked it, and she went back to sleep. This happened a third time. She stuck her hand out, and the dog stopped whimpering and came and licked her hand. She stayed awake a few moments afterward, and she went back to sleep again. In the morning, she woke up and stuck her hand out by the bed, but nothing licked her hand. She thought the dog had already awakened and was just in the front room. She rolled over and got out of bed, heard a drip, 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 drip. She thought the sound was coming from the kitchen, so she walked over and turned the handles on the sink faucet, but it wasn't the source of the noise.
After frustratingly checking the sink and its pipes, she gave up and continued into her bathroom to take a shower. As she got closer to the bathroom door, it was evident that the sound was coming from within. She opened the door, looked above the bathtub, and gasped in utter horror. There, hanging from the light by his collar, was her loving companion. His blood was dripping into the black bathtub. She screamed and began to cry, wiping her eyes and sobbing. She turned and looked into the mirror. In the mirror, she saw the dog's reflection, and written in the mirror in her dog's blood, with drips and streaking hanging down from each letter, were the words, "Humans can lick too."
And that's licking.
That's licking. I told you you knew it, you bastard.
Pretty sure that's from a short story, or a short film.
There is a short film, but it started off as this story. Kind of like it was more of like a camp story kind of thing, like campfire story, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But it might have been written on something other than CreepyPasta.com beforehand.
Well, most things aren't written on CreepyPasta.com.
Yeah, it was.
They're re-uploaded.
And I guess people just
They're
Don't really want to give it the
primarily
votes.
of the time it's Reddit.
Kyle, you've never read it, right?
Yeah, so this story
Nope.
originated in the early 80s.
As like a campfire story.
It was published as a book in 1982. Then there's been multiple variations, but the core narrative remains consistent. A young girl, often alone, is frightened by a local killer and comforted by her dog licking her hand, only to later discover the dog is either dead or never present. The killer's the one licking her.
How do you publish something that short as a book?
Just a short story. I'm sure it probably had a bunch of short stories in it.
Probably like something like scary stories to tell in the dark.
Yeah. This
Yeah,
probably
that makes
was
sense.
in that book, honestly. So it was originally titled. So there's two original titles for it before licking. It was The Licked Hand and Humans Can Lick Too, is what it's called.
Okay, that's what I've heard. The title is Humans Can Lick Too.
Yeah, but long before like creepypastas were a thing. So this is just kind of like a campfire story.
Yeah. And I do think the video you're talking about, the short film, I do think I saw that before I ever read this story as well.
I think that's how I know it from.
But yeah, I mean, it's simple, straight to the point, kind of spooky, like just kind of like real horror, like I don't know.
I think the end is goofy
dude.
just because, you know, it's a creepypasta and that's just kind of how they have to end it, you know?
Yeah.
But, like, leading up to that, you know, it's pretty good. It's a pretty good short story. It builds it pretty well for only being 6 paragraphs.
Mm-hmm. It's such a short story where it's okay that it reveals what actually kind of is happening.
Yeah.
Just a dude licking.
Oh yeah, somebody
Her
in
hand.
the comments said I remember this from one of the scary stories to tell in the dark books.
Yeah, I would assume it's probably what it really originated from. Because I knew I heard it before, but I was like, I did not read this creepypasta in my life.
And there's a movie
That's probably
too
where I read
about that, I guess.
All right, Kyle, after hearing it for the first time, what is your rating of licking?
Yeah, for a short story, I think it kind of did pretty good on giving a lot of detail while not giving a lot of detail at the same time, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I really do like that and I appreciate that. And I like how it just ends on the let your imagination take it from there. So
Yeah.
I'll give it like B+.
Okay. Kian, what do you
plus.
think?
So the actual writing is a D, but the story, like the concept, is like a C. So I'd give it, I don't know, like low C, high D.
Okay. I'm gonna put it D, just because you have Jeff the Killer in C. That
Good idea.
for me, this is gonna be my first non-F, and I think I'm gonna have to put it in C. And I think the reason why is kind of like what Kyle said. You know, it builds the story pretty well. It gives good information pretty fast, and for a short story, you know, you have to do that, and it did it fairly well. It left it to interpretation, but at the same time, kind of what you were saying with, it's not the greatest writing.
Yeah.
Kind of fits between your guys' right at the C for me.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's
good.
That's the end of this story. Now let's get into the next one.
So now we got Gateway of the Mind, written by an anonymous author. In 1983, a team of deeply pious scientists conducted a radical experiment in an undisclosed facility. The scientists had theorized that a human without access to any senses or ways to perceive stimuli would be able to perceive the presence of God. They believed that the 5 senses clouded our awareness of eternity, and without them, a human could actually establish contact with God by thought. An elderly man who claimed to have nothing left to live for was the only test subject to volunteer. To purge him of all his senses, the scientists performed a complex operation in which every sensory nerve connection to the brain was surgically severed. Although the test subject retained full muscular function, he could not see, hear, taste, smell, or feel. With no possible way to communicate with or even sense the outside world, he was alone with his thoughts. Scientists monitored him as he spoke aloud about his state of mind in jumbled, slurred sentences that he couldn't even hear. After 4 days, the man claimed to be hearing hushed, unintelligible voices in his head. Assuming it was an onset of psychosis, the scientists paid little attention on the man's concerns.
2 days later, the man cried that he could hear his dead wife speaking with him, and even more, he could communicate back. The scientists were intrigued, but not convinced until the subject started naming dead relatives of the scientists. He repeated personal information to the scientists that only their dead spouses and parents would have known. At this point, a sizable portion of scientists left the study. After a week of conserving with the deceased through his thoughts, the subject became distressed, saying the voices were overwhelming. In every waking moment, his consciousness was bombarded by hundreds of voices that refused to leave him alone. He frequently threw himself against the wall, trying to elicit a pain response. He begged the scientists for sedatives so he could escape the voices by sleeping. This tactic worked for 3 days until he started having severe night terrors. The subject repeatedly said that he could see and hear the deceased in his dreams.
Only a day later, the subject began to scream and claw at his non-functional eyes, hoping to sense something in the physical world. The hysterical subject now said the voices of the dead were deafening and hostile, speaking of hell and the end of the world. At one point he yelled, "No heaven, no forgiveness," for 5 hours straight. He continually begged to be killed, but the scientists were convinced that he was close to establishing contact with God. After another day, the subject could no longer form coherent sentences. Seemingly mad, he started to bite off chunks of flesh from his arm. The scientists rushed into the test chambers and restrained him to a table so he could not kill himself. After a few hours of being tied down, the subject halted his struggling and screaming. He stared blankly at the ceiling as teardrops silently streaked across his face. For 2 weeks, the subject had to be manually rehydrated due to constant crying. Eventually, he turned his head and, despite his blindness, made focused eye contact with the scientist for the first time in the study. He whispered, "I have spoken with God, and he has abandoned us." And his vital signs stopped. There was no apparent cause of death. And that's Gateway of the Mind.
What a story. So like I was saying earlier, it kind of reminds me of it's like Russian sleep experiment. It has this like literally the same exact format and similar concepts, and like the whole thing is just they're very similar stories.
Yeah, I agree. I think, this might be a controversial take. I think I get more out of this than Russian Sleep Experiment just because of I won't go into spoilers for Kyle, but the ending of the Russian Sleep Experiment.
Yeah.
I think that this really stays on point and just really drives into the point that they're making.
Yeah.
And they really do a super good job at it.
I do think it still is a little bit silly.
Oh yeah, 100%. I think it's silly, but I think
Like-
that its quote is crazy. I think it's a really good quote.
The last quote.
Yeah.
I think it is. That's a pretty scary quote, and it's fun. It's definitely less silly than the Russian sleep experiment, but it's still
Sure.
like there's things where it's like you can poke holes in.
Oh
like,
yeah.
there would never be a scientists they don't go about studies in this way.
No.
But as we know, they don't exactly go through scientific processes like traditional. So it's kind of silly in that way.
For sure. Kyle, thoughts?
Yeah, bringing up the poking holes in the story, you can poke holes in just like the writing alone contradicting itself, saying, in the beginning, with no possible way to communicate with or even sense the outside world, he was alone with his thoughts, and then yet somehow he's able to communicate that he needs sedatives, and then the scientists were able to get him that. Doesn't really make sense to me because he can't really talk properly or communicate properly, so I don't get how that functions. But I mean, other than that,
Yeah.
That's definitely a slight contradiction. The only thing I would say about that is communication is two ways. So the only reason it's saying that he can't communicate with the outside world is he can talk to them, but he can't receive any feedback from them.
To throw a wrench in your statement you're about to make, he's begging them. He's at the point where it doesn't matter what he's saying is like coherent or not, he's just begging for it. Like, he's saying whatever comes to mind, whatever he can think of, he's just saying it out of his mouth. Because even they were saying that when he was just speaking aloud, all of it was jumbled, slurred sentences. So he was just trying to get out those words. And then they were saying, like, obviously they could tell that he's begging for sedatives when he's just begging for it over and over again.
Right. Yeah. No, I get that part of it. It just...
The one part that's funniest to me,
I don't know,
is how he dies in the end with no apparent cause of death after he was biting chunks of flesh out of his arm, and he was going, like, he was trying to kill himself, and he's, like, completely in, like, a state of complete psychotic breakdown.
Yeah.
He probably had a heart attack.
Yeah, 100%.
Like, I guarantee there's a reason for his death.
And then he's on all these other drugs, too.
Yeah. So saying...
He probably definitely, his heart just blew up.
Yeah, they could have said that. They don't have to say there was no apparent cause of death. Like, they could have just said he died of a heart attack, and it'd be like, yeah, that makes sense.
You know,
Unless they're just trying to say that God just straight snatched him.
Yeah. You're not allowed to talk to me and come back to living.
No,
something like that.
You're stuck with me, pal.
Yeah.
I'm interested to see how you will rank it, Kyle.
Yeah, let's hear your ranking for this.
You guys can do your ranking first while I think of mine.
Yeah, for sure. I'm gonna give it a B tier.
Okay. You know what's crazy?
What?
That's
You're also gonna
I'm
give it a
also
B
giving
tier?
it a B tier. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the reason it's a B tier is, and not like obviously higher, is you can poke holes in the story. 100%.
Yeah.
There are some silly things.
But this story is freaking good at what it's intending to do.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really getting its point across of like, you know, oh, if you take all these senses away, you can perceive the presence of God. And it's like,
Yeah.
this guy was put through hell and was like, no, dude, he abandoned us when I spoke to him. We need to get out of here. And then he just dies.
Yeah.
Because
So
he probably went to hell when he was talking.
For you, it almost seems like that end line kind of makes the story.
I'd say the last couple paragraphs. That's why I wanted to read them. Because I think those
Yeah.
will really wrap it up.
yeah.
Like,
It's a good way to end it.
for yelling for 5 hours straight, no heaven, no forgiveness. And
Yeah.
at the same time, it's like he probably can coherently say those because that's all he's hearing in his head too.
Mm-hmm.
Because he's saying that's the voices of the dead are deafening and that's what they're saying.
Yeah.
So if that's all he's hearing, that's probably all he can say in that time frame.
And let's be real, just hearing someone mumble incoherently will always be scary. Even if it's like a crackhead on the side of the street, like you'll like joke and like make fun like but like if you were with them alone like in a dark alley and they're like mumbling to themselves like silently, dude, that's a little bit spooky. Like, who are you talking to? Who are you speaking to right now? It's scary no matter what.
100%. All right, Kyle, did you think of yours?
Yeah, I like the story. I like the mindset of it. The idea of like severing ties with all 5 of your motor functions basically is kind of crazy. Man, yeah. And it really, it's like a ticking time bomb. Like, how long does this guy really have? That's like ultimately what it is. Before he like ultimately tries to kill himself, which basically happened in a way.
Yeah.
I'd probably give it like an even A.
Okay.
You give it an A tier, yeah?
Yeah,
Nice.
I like.
Like a low A tier?
No, just right in the middle of the pack.
Well, I guess you don't have anything else in A tier, so
Yeah.
it's got to be just
2
there.
notches above the last one, and I gave the last one a B+. So,
That's a fair point. Yeah.
Fair assessment.
and I think this one has better detail in being
Yeah,
a
for
2-minute
sure.
read
Mm.
with making it more creepy and more of like a intriguing story to keep reading. Like
For
this
sure.
one feels more of like I wanna like read a little bit more before the I've spoken with God part happened.
Yeah. You want more substance to
Yeah,
it?
I want more substance to it, whether that's just a deeper dive into like each of these specific days that they pointed out, or if there is like more days that weren't talked about.
Yeah. Comparative to Lick, it's like the same number of paragraphs, but each paragraph is in such excruciating detail comparative to Lick. Here's the question though. If you're one of the scientists, and he starts yelling about no heaven, no forgiveness for 5 hours straight, are you gonna be with the other scientists that are just like, I think he's close to establishing contact with God, so we're just gonna let it go? Or are you stepping in?
I would be with the group that left, where it said at this point a sizable portion of scientists left the study. That's when I would have left.
You would have left.
Yeah, when they started naming
I
dead relatives of the
would've
scientists. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I would have just stayed outside the room and been like, I want to watch and see where this is going, but
I don't want to be here.
I don't want to be in the room with him in case he actually does get possessed.
Yeah.
I definitely would have been one of the guys that is like pushing, like, guys, I think he's almost there. He's almost there. We just gotta let it keep going. Like, he's right there. He's right there. That's definitely the position I would put myself in.
Trust me, this is the hand we win our money back.
This is it. I know he's gonna get it. And then he starts biting his own flesh off, and I'm just sitting in the corner, and everyone's staring at me like, really? And I'm just like, I thought he was gonna get there. I don't.
Alright, if you liked the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment down below. And catch us in the next one. Peace.
Peace.
Doses.